I wouldn't kill to win a war. I don't get what they do it for. It's all so terribly vague. I see the pictures from 1,000 years of battle, and I think it's such a bore.
Hello and welcome to the Tech Dirt Podcast. Today with special guest Amanda Palmer.
You left out my middle name, Mike.
Okay, you want to try that again?
No, I think we should keep all this.
All right.
Do we have to bleep the middle name?
Amanda fucking Palmer
Thanks,
just
Mike.
published a brand new book called The Art of Asking. And we're excited to have Amanda on the podcast. And the way it's going to work today is that she's going to do a brief reading from the book, and then that will lead into a discussion with the rest of us, which is Dennis and Hirsch and myself, Mike.
Groovy, let's do it.
All right, go for it.
Page 42.
For those of you following along at home.
Yeah, and for those of you who have a sentimental attachment to the number 42.
Ah, yeah, that's true.
I've had a problem feeling real all my life. I didn't know until recently how absolutely universal that feeling is, though. For a long time, I thought I was alone. Psychologists have a term for it, imposter syndrome, but before I knew that phrase existed, I coined my own. The fraud police. The fraud police are the imaginary, terrifying force of real grown-ups who you believe at some subconscious level are going to come knocking on your door in the middle of the night saying, "We've been watching you. And we have evidence that you have no fucking idea what you're doing. You stand accused of the crime of completely winging it. You are guilty of making shit up as you go along. You do not actually deserve your job, and we're taking everything away. And we're telling everybody." I mentioned the fraud police during a commencement speech that I recently gave at an arts college, and I asked the adults in the hall, including the faculty, to raise their hands if they'd ever had this feeling. And I don't think a single hand stayed down. People working in the arts engage in street combat with the fraud police on a daily basis because much of our work is new and not readily or conveniently categorized. When you're an artist, nobody ever tells you or hits you with the magic wand of legitimacy. You have to hit your own head with your own handmade wand, and you feel stupid doing it. There's no correct path to becoming a real artist. You might think you'll gain legitimacy by going to art school or getting published or getting signed to a label, but it's actually all bullshit, and it's all in your head. Basically, you're an artist when you say you are, and you're a good artist when you make somebody else feel or experience something deep or unexpected. When you've made it in academia, you become a tenured professor. It's official most of the time, though. Outside appointment and approval, congratulations, you're an official professor, you're an official CEO or a president. In any of these fields doesn't necessarily silence the fraud police. In fact, that outside approval can make the fraud police louder. It's more like fighting them in high court instead of in a back alley with your fists. Along with the layers of official titles and responsibilities come even deeper, scarier levels of, oh fuck, they're gonna find me out. Coffee break. Just so you don't have to freak out and tiptoe. Thank you. That's beautiful. No, I've been trying to turn myself into a grown-up. Real grown-up who drinks black coffee. Where were we? Oh, fuck, they're going to find me out. I can imagine a seasoned brain surgeon in the moment before that first incision having that teeny moment where she thinks, for real, I dropped my cell phone in a puddle this morning. Couldn't find my keys, can't hold down a relationship, and here I am clutching a sharp knife about to cut someone's head open, and they could die. Who is letting me do this? This is bullshit. Everybody out there is winging it to some degree. Of this, we can be pretty sure. in both the arts and in the business worlds, the difference between the amateurs and the professionals is simple. The professionals know they're winging it. The amateurs pretend they're not.
Awesome.
My book is available on audible.com.
Did you read the?
I did. I read the audiobook, and I actually I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did the very last editing draft because my book was so down to the wire. I basically, like, the ink was fresh as I handed it in. I'm finding tons of mistakes in it. There are like at least, I've found at least 10 or 20 mistakes in the book because it was just like, I wrote it in 7 weeks, I edited it, I handed it in, and they sent it to press.
Books should have like an upgrade cycle.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Well, they do have the second printing,
edition.
right?
So I was going to say you sounded really practiced. Did you have to go through the book several times when you were recording it for Audible, or was it just like that? That's
Well, I don't want to give Audible more credit than they deserve. I actually didn't record it for Audible. I recorded it for Hachette,
Right.
and they also own the audiobook. But I sat in a room with an engineer and someone also from the publisher, just reading along, making sure I wasn't making any egregious mistakes and catching little things like, as you sit here reading this book, and she'd be like, "Sorry, Amanda, as they're listening, this is the audiobook." It was really fun though. It was, and I had this captive audience of 2 people,
Right.
and I'm a performer. So I was like, I have to emotionally affect these 2 people. And I would be like glancing in, like, did you cry at that section? Hello, are you in there? It was great. It was a really, really fun experience. And I had no idea how many fucking people listen to audiobooks. I just didn't know. I've
Yeah.
never listened to an audiobook in my life. And as soon as the book came out, my Twitter feed exploded with, what I expected, which is all the people who pre-ordered the book. But like, thousands of people binge listening to the audiobook, and it made me so happy that I had taken the time. I took 3 full days and read it, and I was so happy that I didn't trust somebody else with my baby because there's a lot of things in here that only I really understand what the inflection is, and I didn't want to hand it off to somebody else.
If you listen to audiobooks a lot, I have this happen to me. I don't know if it happens to other people, but I'll forget which books I listen to on my phone and which books I actually read. And it's really
blends
bizarre.
together?
Yeah, it kind of blends
with
together.
Well, that's good though. I mean, it's like it's reading with your brain. It's
Yeah.
words going into your head.
Well, this weird thing will happen also where I'll have this book and I listen to it in audiobook, and then later I'll forget I listened to the audiobook, and then I'll start reading the book and I'll be like, this sounds so familiar. And I don't
Yeah.
know if it's because the plot is hackneyed or if I've actually read this story before, and then I'm like halfway through and I'm like, oh man, I have the audio.
Neil's got I think I'm pretty sure it's an Audible thing or it's an iTunes, whatever it is. It's like, you might even know what I'm talking about. He's got some kind of syncing device for his Kindle and his audiobook so that
Really?
if he leaves off audio and
He can match, yeah.
he can
I
match.
think-
It'll just drop you off right in your Kindle where you've been listening.
I think Audible does that now. I mean, I don't use Audible, but I've seen that or heard something where they're making it really advanced these
And
days.
I've heard that there are people who like, and this is sort of like getting into a deep realm of book fetishism that like I have not encountered, but Neil knows all these people because he's been in book world for so many years.
By the way, Amanda's talking about Neil Gaiman for those
Gaiman.
listeners. The Gaiman
Yes.
that in case listeners don't
I
know
My-
that.
People know.
Okay.
No, I do that. It's a bad habit. My husband's also a writer. He's written several books and also some comic books. He's very talented. I don't know. I'm from Long Island all of a sudden. There are people who really like listening to the audiobook while they read along.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like
That's
a
bizarre.
completely, it's like a total 360 experience while someone dressed as Amanda Palmer rubs your feet and paints your eyebrows on.
Well, there's some audiobooks that are like crazy big productions, right?
Yeah.
Like Mel Brooks' son, and I don't remember his name. Oh, Max Brooks. He did this book called World War Z, which is like this very sober take on like a post-apocalyptic zombie world. But every chapter is read by another major like Hollywood actor, right?
Yeah.
The guy from
Yeah.
MASH, who's on
well,
NPR,
and you find this out also if you're married to Neil Gaiman. There's awards there's the Audis, which are the right.
That's awesome.
This is like I only found out that there were jam band Grammys called the Jammies because I had a jam band manager for a while. But yeah, I mean, it's a world like, and that's the thing I've actually found out writing a book.
You discover
all the worlds
Right.
that you didn't know existed when you become an author and you write a book, and you know, like all the things that I found out when I got into the music business and didn't realize, like all of these strange pockets of existence.
How similar do you think the two worlds are?
I think they're so similar in some ways and so very different in others. I mean, having gone through the production cycle of making an album, there's so many similarities, even like artistic similarities from, you know, the first draft and the editing and then the re-editing and then the exhaustion that sets in was a lot like writing and then recording and then mixing and the deep pockets that you get into when you're mixing a song and you're literally looking at every single teeny level of every hi-hat, and you're dealing with things in, you know, decibel levels and shit that no one really hears in the final product, but you're in here like doing word searches because you've been overusing the word actually in this chapter, and you're just going in and fucking fine-tuning every little bit. And there were a lot of process parallels like that. And then, you know, and then this thing is turned into a physical object, and then the physical object goes out to the world, and then it hits the world, and they have their own interpretation of it and their own experience. What's been fascinating to me is looking at the difference between being on a major label and being on a major publisher.
Yeah.
And granted, I had one of the shittiest experiences on a major label that I think it's possible to have. You know, I wasn't, you know, beloved by Seymour Stein and signed to Sony and made the darling of a really, you know, old school highfalutin record label. And I wasn't on Matador, and I wasn't on one of, you know, the super hip, you know, indie labels like Secretly Canadian or, you know, or whatever. I was on a really, 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 you know, I don't want to call them shitty, but like a really cutthroat, bottom line, you know, factory kind of metal label where they really just were not about artist development, and they were really just about like, how are we going to sell as many records as possible? And they took almost no input from us. And I've had a really wonderful experience with my publisher. But it's, you know, it's also, it's a chicken egg thing. It's like, if I had walked in, you know, as a naive 25-year-old knowing nothing about fucking anything, you know, what kind of experience, and with no respect in the industry as a
Right.
whole.
You know a little bit more now.
I know a lot. I know a lot more, and I think I'm probably also easier to work with. When I was 26, it was like, these are my songs, this is my world, this is my fucking life. And now I'm a lot easier when it comes to stepping back, compromising, you know, letting somebody just do their job, and like not running over to their desk and shuffling their fucking papers around and going, no, that's not the way I would, you know. So I think there's a little bit of that in that thread. But seriously, the way I've seen the publishing world treat its authors, it's like being in a foreign country. Because, and it's sort of like when you get out of an abusive relationship and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know such a thing was possible. The publishing industry seems to really understand that their art comes from artists, that their books come from writers, and that they need to take care of the people who make the shit that sells the product that pays for their, you know, that pays their salaries. And they feel the ecosystem a lot more than the major label system, where it really felt like the artists were just fucking disposable because there was another band down the street that would, you know, that they could sucker in if they couldn't sucker you in.
I don't think, well, Amanda, like, I don't think everyone has that great of an experience, even with the book publishing industry. I think you were probably a little bit more established because I'm a lawyer. Every once in a while, I'll get a client that's not so happy with.
Oh, sure. No. I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to paint a unicorns and rainbows picture with book publishing either. But in my personal experience,
Yeah.
which is of course all I can speak from, it's been black and white. But I'm also, I'm 38 now. I signed that major label deal when I was young, I was 27,
Right.
had just started my band, and and I know a lot more about a lot more now.
So, going back to the passage that you read, now that you have a book and it's a physical thing and it's sitting right here on the table in front of us, do you feel like a fraud as an author?
No. No, I mean, I sat my ass in a chair and wrote a book. That's kind of hard to argue with. I did it.
Right. But, I mean, you'd done that with other stuff too, right? I mean, you'd made music and released the music and recorded the music.
Yeah, I mean, my rules, whatever. My personal growth in the I'm actually a waste of space, and why don't I have a real fucking job, and why aren't I contributing something decent to society? That realization and that self-acceptance definitely crosses all media. Like once I could accept that, and this is actually, writing a book is actually a little harder because this isn't what I do.
Right.
I'm holding the book up here. I do music. I identify as a musician. That's what I wanted to do. It feels like that's what my fundamental, if you strip away all of the internet shit and all the Kickstarter shit and the book shit and the TED Talk shit and all of the other things that have sort of gotten hung on the coat rack of why I'm even sitting here, I'm a songwriter and I write good songs. And it is what got people through the door into my life to begin with. A lot of people forget this because the conversation about everything else that I've done has become so loud. But it's hard to write a book. And even as I was writing it, I was like, this isn't what I do. I write music. I mean, I can explain all these things and I can explain my life and I can try and write this book and I can try and stitch this book together like a long opera, which is what it is, actually. If you read this book and you consider that I'm a songwriter, it really, it's an incredibly musical book. But
we should stage it.
Yeah, this is our musical
The Art of Asking on Ice.
Well, there's lots of little song lyrics in there, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Sing
and
those parts.
it doesn't take place chronologically, and there's lots of images that kind of tie together and tricks that I play on the reader or the listener, and that I had to overcome that. It's just like, who the fuck are you to think that you can write a book? You're a songwriter, and yes, you've written a blog for a long time, but I got over that pretty fast. It still hurts though, because I've been very deliberately not reading the book reviews, which I've never done before in my life. I've never put out a big project and just blanket universally had the reviews filtered by somebody else. I've got my friends sending me the really good ones, and that's it. And but I see the headlines, and I've seen some of the headlines, like especially my hometown paper, who like traditionally have a really difficult relationship with me, and and a few other news outlets. And I don't need to go very far to just see the headline flash by on Twitter that like this book is a steaming pile of shitty narcissism, and Amanda Palmer has absolutely no value to add to the world. And those are my most insecure voices talking to me, going like, oh my God, my book really is a steaming pile of narcissism. And, why do I think that me sharing these stories is actually going to help anybody? But those moments of self-doubt are erased really quickly by just going to my Twitter feed and seeing thousands of people saying, oh my God, this book really affected me. Oh my God, this chapter really resonated with me. Oh my God, I'm sitting here at the bus stop crying. And I'm like, well, they're the critics.
Right.
And maybe the book didn't affect them, but I didn't write the fucking book for the critics. I wrote this book for anyone who would be affected by it, and that's fine.
Right. And if there were no criticism at all, then you probably didn't go far enough in some sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the fact that, whenever you do anything, if you're asking for a reaction, right? Part of that reaction sometimes is, sometimes people are going to react negatively, and that probably means that, you're pushing a lot of the right buttons actually.
Yes. And, and everyone always says that intellectually. It's only been really in the last few years of my life, especially as I come under like greater and greater fire from more areas, that I really buy that I really believe it, that, that the criticism or the controversy or the degree to which, people are yelling at you and calling you useless or calling your work irrelevant or calling your opinion, it really has started to feel like a badge of honor that so many people disagree with me. And I, and it took me like hitting the bottom of the barrel and reading some like deep below the belt criticism in really big legit news media. There was like a blog in the New Yorker around the time of the Kickstarter, and this guy, I forget the journalist's name, but he just like ripped me a new one and was like, Amanda Palmer is the most inauthentic, narcissistic, fraudulent artist to have ever walked the earth, and I don't understand why. And he wrapped up his article saying that one of my worst offenses was that I called my music Brechtian punk, because how dare I compare myself to Bertolt Brecht, who is actually making real art, and how dare I call myself punk, unlike all of these really, really admirable people like the punk bands of the 70s. And at that moment, and there I am like crying reading this article, and at that moment I stood back and was like, wait a second. This is the New Yorker. And so, we're talking mainstream press. And they fucking hated punk. And they hated Brecht. And I'm like, wait a second. I've arrived. This guy is basically, without knowing it, actually putting me right on a shelf with my heroes who were so fucking hated and laughed at in their moment. At their time. And then of course people looked back and thought that Brecht was actually making incredible, important art, but he was considered a joke. His plays were considered ridiculous. So, that was a real, I thank that New Yorker blogger, because that was one of those moments where like it hurt so much. And then I realized this is one of those, the only way out is through. And I think I actually really feel this for real for the first time, that if I really want my work to be significant and my art to be real, and if I really do want to be an authentic artist, this is just going to be my life forever. And that's great.
Right. So I think to some extent you're realizing that the fraud police sometimes themselves are a fraud.
Well, the fraud police are a fraud.
Right.
They're the fraudulent fraud police. And it is, the fraud police wear two masks. They wear, they're a projection from inside your head of who you think the position of authority to judge is. And that is the secret that, that artists, if they get there, learn, which is they don't fucking exist. And that there is not a board out there, and there's not a set of high court judges who get to decide about your art, who get to decide whether or not you've passed the bar. You have to do it. And that's also the thing about being an artist, is like, you kind of don't want to do it. You want someone else to come along and accept you. But even when that happens, and you see this is why fucking artists go crazy. Like, even when you're there with your armful of Grammys, it's not enough. Like, if it hasn't happened on the inside, then you're standing there with your Grammys going, oh my God, this isn't real.
Right.
Someone out there is looking at me going, this is total bullshit. And it really only happens internally. And those things can help. And the shelf full of Grammys can help. But I've found that, it's not the Grammys and it's not the review in the New York Times. It's the direct effect that you have on the human beings that are face to face with you and your art. And I talk about this in the book, and I talk about touring in the early days of the Dresden Dolls. And I was really insecure and really afraid and didn't know if I deserved to be up there playing my stupid songs that were really personal and angsty. And I felt really ashamed that I thought I had the right to be up there. And Brian, the drummer of the Dresden Dolls, he had no problem with that. He was like, fuck that. Like, rock and roll's amazing, and I play drums, and I'm amazing, and let's go fucking rock face. And I was sort of like the simpering, pathetic one in the corner going like, and it was only after like night after night after month of being in the van and touring, and then year after year of facing the human beings at the end of the show. And these human beings were students and lawyers and doctors and programmers and teachers and all walks of life saying to me, your music helps me in one form or the other. Your music touches me. Your music, comforts me, whatever it was. And you hear that from enough, quote unquote, real people. And then I really started to understand, oh my God, my job as an artist is actually a part of the ecosystem. And it took maybe thousands of people grabbing my arm and looking me in the eye and saying, Amanda, please keep doing what you do. It's not unimportant. And it was them. They drilled it into my head. It wasn't Rolling Stone or Spin or MTV hitting me with the wand of legitimacy. It was me seeing myself reflected in the eyes of these other people.
Do you think an Amanda Palmer today would have an easier time building that connection with fans? A lot of what you did was sort of face-to-face. Do you still think artists have to do that? Or do you think you can sort of do it over Twitter, do it over YouTube, that kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think, I have some really wonderfully authentic exchanges with people on my blog and on Twitter and on Facebook. It doesn't feel as profound as hugging someone and watching them cry. It just doesn't. It's up there, but it's kind of like having sex with a condom. Like you can't totally feel it. But I also, I think the other advantage, if it's an advantage that, Amanda Palmer, at 17 right now might have, is the wand of legitimacy idea, the idea that like you've made it when ... like that list has exploded. When I was a teenager, you made it when you were on MTV and you were holding an LP copy of your record with a label stamp on the back. That's when you made it. And that's not true anymore. Right. Ask a 17-year-old like what MTV even is. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like we looked at a pretty narrow bandwidth of what it meant to succeed. Your music was on the radio, your videos were played on MTV, and you were on a label, and you were huge. And that's really the only visible rock stars were the giant ones.
Right. So what are the signals now? What do you think? Like being on YouTube and having 1 million views? Or?
Yeah, it's view counts and followers and number of human beings listening to the single that you're putting out and the number of people expecting more music down the pipeline. And of course, like those old systems of legitimacy are still there. Like, if you get signed to Capitol Records, yeah, sure, that's going to feel real. And if MTV offers you your own reality show, that's going to feel real. But I think there's a million different paths now. And I would be really interested to see what those answers are. And I talk to a lot of young musicians because I tour around and I talk here and I talk there and I hang out with them and, I tour with them. And some of the answers are scary and, and not so tasty. And listening to a band say like, well, we'll know that we've made it when a brand comes to us, with an endorsement and we can, and we're finally endorsed by Red Bull. And I'm like, oh God. Yeah. But, it's just a new version of the old bullshit, and, I grew up with an idea of credibility that teenagers like no one teaches them about cred. Like it just doesn't exist. Like to them, to your average like 17 or 18-year-old rock star wannabe, like getting a Doritos endorsement is totally cool. Whereas my generation is like, oh my God, that's kind of the end for you.
I think it's a different aesthetic now. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, well, and people have talked about that too, where just this idea that like there used to be the concept of selling out for those kinds of things, and today it's not like that. But related to that, and I know we're sort of running short on time, so I think this will be sort of the final question. When you talk about all these different paths and different ways that people can go, like at least what I hear from a lot of people is that part is really scary to them. They like the aspect before where there was a single path. And,
Yeah,
and,
you just
know,
get on the you just get on the conveyor
Right.
belt and wait to get chopped up.
Or you fall off and you
Right.
go and do something else instead.
Right.
Whereas now there's a lot more opportunities, but the fact is that the path, you just have this wide open field instead of this path that you try and stay on.
Yeah, well, and there's something I miss about that. I miss the physicality of like my record's out and everyone wants to run to the store to buy it. And I desperately miss record stores. I spent my youth in record stores like as if they were church, going through the C and the S section looking for the Cure bootlegs and the Swans bootlegs and getting really, really excited when I found an obscure Nick Cave CD. And I think there is definitely something to be said for that kind of scarcity when people were really loyal to their favorite bands and collected their music and listened to the filler tracks and collected the B-sides and were really completionists. And not to say that the teenagers aren't fans of artists, but the music does feel more disposable because it is. Because when you've got access to everything, it's kind of hard to feel pride in your collection of exactly 95 records and tapes and CDs, wondering which 3 tapes you're going to bring on your road trip. And I miss that relationship. I even miss having it. Right. I kind of, I've got a computer full of music right now and, can download 1 million new records a day. And I miss going to the store and wondering which 4 CDs I'm going to buy. And it's, but I'm definitely not a whiner and a preservationist. I think we have to move on. And I think the question is, what's the new relationship look like? And what's my job as the artist to be in that relationship? I think the artifacts are still fantastic and I still print vinyl. But I'm actually excited to move on to something. I think I'm going to be using Patreon. And I love the idea of doing things fast and not waiting a fucking year for my album to come out, but like writing a song today and like running into a studio and tracking it tomorrow and mixing it on the spot and uploading it and saying, hey guys, look at what I made yesterday. Yeah. And then letting the good stuff float to the top and being able to point traffic whichever way I want. And I think it's important not to get too sad about change.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. I know you have to get going, and but I want to thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
a great discussion. And for everyone listening, if you haven't yet bought the book, go buy it, whether the audio version or the physical copy,
or both.
Or both,
or the many varieties of ebook.
Yeah.
Yes, or all of those. Buy them for your friends.
It is a fantastic Christmas gift. It even kind of has a Christmas color theme. Thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, and thanks to everyone who's listening in. And we'll be back again soon with another podcast. Thanks.
Artificially